I don't know if the tech gods smile upon us or not. I don't trust anybody. I trust no one. No one at all. It's saying that we're okay. It's saying that we're okay, but I still haven't seen it. If I don't see it, it's not real. I am the doubting Thomas of the internet. I have seen it. I have seen it, and it is good. Now we're cooking. Now it's official. Now it's wait. We're okay. I'm just making sure everything. Yeah. We got it. Okay. Good. What's up, everybody? Good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. Good evening for those of you in other places. Good morning for everyone in my time zone. I do my time zone third. It's morning. This is my morning show. Get your news on with Ron. I hope you are staying safe. I hope you are staying well. I hope you are. I hope you had a fun weekend. I really do. I hope you're doing good. Quick shout out to everyone who makes this show possible. Our friends over at ZT.com, ZHITEA.com. Their tea kind of rules. You can get their tea wholesale now because of the pandemic. I've been obsessed with the white Chinese peach tea. I've also had some Vigilante tea, Graham Elwood's tea. It's very good. I like the Dark Knight variety because it has caffeine. But ZT.com, check it out. Our friends over at triageoil.com, TRIAGE oil.com. Trendy Nay educates the public on cannabis, and he makes an amazing pain oil. You know what? I gotta share this about Triage Oil, and this is the truth. I mean, Trendy Nay, he sends me product, and the oil has really worked wonders for my neck, especially. You guys know I was in a bad car accident in 2013. My neck will likely never be the same as long as I live. This oil has done more for it than anything else has. And totally true story. Over the weekend, I got a little bump. I got a little not the druggy kind. I got somebody backed in, hit me from behind. It was just, it was sudden standstill traffic because there was an accident and somebody was a little not quite adamant enough on their brakes, and they gave me a little tap. No damage was done. It was no big deal. We just kind of looked at the bumper, and I was like, all right, don't worry about it. Just be more careful. And we went on our merry way. But it jolted me a little bit. My neck did not feel great after it happened because, of course, when it was my bad accident, that would happen. But anyway, I put some pain oil on immediately when I got home, and my neck felt infinitely better the next day. And, I'm going to be using it nightly. I use it regularly all the time, but I'm going to be putting it on every day. So I really feel like I would be a lot more pain right now if it wasn't for that oil. So anyway, triageoil.com, TRIAGE oil.com. Last announcement before I bring in the guest today. It is Music Monday, and we got a Music Monday story coming up, but I got a really fun announcement. I was asked by an online radio network called Modern Retro Radio to curate a punk rock special, and in particular, music that was released within the past 5 years. I had a blast curating this thing, and it's going to air this coming Saturday, November 14th at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. So mark your calendars. I'm doing an online listening party. Wherever you're at, tune into it. You can go to modernretroradio.com, listen to it right from their website. It airs it starts at 7 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. Eastern time, November 14th. I hope you guys enjoy the special. And afterwards, I'll be doing a Zoom hang with anyone who wants to come hang out. Let me know what you thought of the special, if you enjoyed it, what your favorite songs were, if you have any questions. So if you're interested in hanging out in that Zoom afterwards, email me, ronplacone.com. And again, modernretroradio.com at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. All right, without further ado, I am very excited to talk to my guest today. He's been on the show before. And he just got off a crazy campaign season where he went up against Nancy Pelosi. And we're going to talk to him about everything having to do with that. Please welcome back to the show, Mr. Shahid Buttar. What's up, Shahid?
So good to be with you, Ron. I'm doing well, thanks. I've sprained my finger over the weekend, but otherwise I'm all right.
No kidding. What'd you do?
It was moving boxes out of the office. We're winding down the campaign operation. So we had a couple boxes of particularly Chinese language literature that we never, were able to hand out. And so moving those into recycling, I managed to bend my finger the wrong way, but that's all good. I'll be fine. It's an excuse to develop ambidexterity.
You got the thing on it. You're good. You got the I hurt my, I hurt my finger when I was, I think I was like 10 years old, and I broke my finger. And I'll never forget this story. It was like the funniest thing because, when you're 10 years old and you never, whenever adults are unorthodox, it's like the funniest thing in the world to you because you're just like, oh man, that adult was unorthodox with me. and kind of treated me like an adult a little bit, and it's hilarious. So I break my finger, and it was right around my birthday.
Okay.
So I had my birthday party, and my family was there, and my friends were there. And
this doesn't sound so funny yet so far, just to put this out there.
Well, no, well, it's just a broken finger. It's not like I had a good time, but like, so my aunt, one of my mom's sisters, she comes over, and all my friends are just standing right there, and she hands me my birthday gift. She goes, "Happy birthday." I'm like, "Thanks, Aunt Kathy." And then she goes, "Yeah, I heard you broke your finger." And then she goes, in front of all my friends, she just goes, "What did I tell you about jamming your finger up your ass? I told you have to be careful. What were you doing? You keep jamming your finger up your ass. Look what happened." And all my friends just lose their shit. And I was cracking up. And she's still, this was over 20 years ago. She'll still like, "Remember I said that thing in front of your friends?"
Comedy runs deep in your family, I
see. So let's talk about you first, man. Then we're going to get into some of the world. You, for anyone who may not be familiar with you, you went up against one of the biggest political powerhouses in the country. And, throughout your campaign, and I give you a lot of credit for this, you certainly had made an amazing effort, and your staff made an amazing effort. But there was always a sense of you never tried to downplay what you were up against. You know what I mean? Like you never downplayed what you were like. You never were like, she's not like you never did. Like you were like, we're going up. This is David and Goliath. We're not going to try to sugarcoat this. That doesn't mean it's impossible. We're fighting for a win, but we know what we're going up against. And you never downplayed that. And so let's just start. You were not victorious, but what's your assessment as far as what happened and what you learned?
I'm super stoked, frankly, about the result. I've been in 3 elections: the 2018 primary, the 2020 primary, and then the 2020 general. And in each of those races, we more than doubled our count from before. So we just won 75,000 votes, which is nothing to shake a stick at. And in March, I won 33,000 votes. So at that pace, I am, if I maintain that pace with respect to the 2022 election, which I haven't, committed to yet, but I'm exploring. If I maintain that pace, I win the seat in 2022. So, and Ro Khanna took 3 races to win his seat, replacing long-serving incumbent Mike Honda. And he's a very similar figure to me in the sense of being a South Asian lawyer, very far to the left, representing a Bay Area constituency with a strong, particularly footprint among tech workers in the electorate. And he's someone certainly whose footsteps I'd be excited to follow, and whose voice I've long been happy to support. And I see a template there that we're well into our process of replicating and executing. So I feel very excited. I do feel, among my reflections from this race, if I'm disappointed in anything in this particular, it is the media, because Nancy Pelosi has not debated an election opponent since 1987. The internet did not exist the last time Nancy Pelosi defended her ideas in public. And it's one thing for the incumbent to duck debates for 30 years. It's worse, though, for the corporate media to give them a free pass. And that is an institutional failing on the part of the corporate media, including MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, ABC, CBS, NBC, the San Francisco Chronicle. I could go on. Every single so-called news outlet in the country failed miserably, not only to conduct ethical journalism, and that's one dimension of it, but there's another way to look at this through a constitutional lens. The press has a constitutional function. And when it doesn't show up for work, it is not me as a challenger or our 30,000 supporters before, the 75,000 people who just voted for me. It's not us who are marginalized, though we are too. It is democracy that is marginalized when the press allows incumbents to escape accountability for their voting records. And if San Francisco had any idea how Nancy Pelosi supported the Trump administration over the last 2 years, I remain very confident that I would be serving in Congress this session. The fact that the media suppressed and didn't ever mention our campaign, just to be clear here, the online independent press was very, very friendly to us. And I'm very grateful for all the attention we got from folks like yourself, or Kyle Kulinski, or Rania Khalek, or Crystal Ball, or Katie Halper, Matt Taibbi. Lots of folks have been very generous with sharing my voice and our campaign's voice with their audiences. But in the local broadcast establishment in San Francisco, the only outlets that ever even mentioned that the sitting Speaker of the House faced a challenger from within the Democratic Party for the first time in the 30 years since she last showed up for a debate were the Pacifica Radio affiliate, which is predictable, and I've been a pretty frequent voice on KPFA over the years, and KTVU, which is a local Fox affiliate, which is to say every other television station and radio station in the city just did not show up for work over the course of 2 years. And the idea that human interest stories about, I choose the news that they found more important to share with people than that. But, I see a lot of people celebrating over the weekend because they see our democracy being, saved from the looming jaws of an aspiring tyrant. And I'm grateful for that too. I also see that the bucket of our democracy is a colander because the aspirations of an aspiring tyrant, frankly, was only the most pressing among a whole litany of constitutional crises. And the failure of the press, I dare say the continuing failures of the press, are a big part of that. And, it's one of the things that gives me, to the extent I have any reservations about running in 2022, it is precisely my question about, whether the press is anything as an institutional lever that I or anyone else in this country can rely on. And,
well, you certainly can't. I mean, the press is concerned with upholding the status quo. I mean, you nailed it. I mean, they're owned by institutions like Comcast or Rupert Murdoch or, it's Jeff Zucker's wet dream. And they're concerned with upholding the status quo. And and as far as the weekend goes, look, my feelings have been nailed once again by an Onion headline.
Okay.
I'm glad Trump lost, but that happiness was quickly squelched by knowledge of a Biden win.
Indeed.
But anyway, but let's stick to your race in particular. Nancy Pelosi, did she ever even acknowledge you at all? Like, was there ever even just getting something wrong? Like even going like, yeah, I know I have an opponent like Sam Buttar or something like that. Did she even do that?
Well, how she acknowledged us was caving on half a dozen policies. So there were a series of different policy issues, and I'll run through them in a second. But in each of these areas, Nancy Pelosi showed up well to her own left than she had been historically. And I take some credit for that because I think our campaign, the threat we presented to her career and the force of the social movements to which we may be served as a lever. So ultimately, when the Protecting Right to Organize Act passed in the House this spring, that was the biggest reform in labor rights in a generation. Hasn't become law because of the Republican Senate, but for the better part of a year, it hadn't become law because Nancy Pelosi stood in the way. And labor unions asserted themselves. Our campaign stood with them in solidarity. And I think we acted as a lever to amplify their concerns because we are the first campaign in 30 years that Nancy Pelosi has had to fear. And she abandoned her longstanding opposition to that bill and moved it through the House. Same story on saving the post office, same story on the Justice and Policing Act, parts of which I oppose, but many, many parts of which I've been advocating for over a decade. So she acknowledged us to that extent, but that's tacit acknowledgement because it's not like she ever gave us credit for it. She just was stealing parts of our platform. The only acknowledgement she's ever had that she is running against anyone is her pretense, a false pretense that she opposes Republicans. And you and I both know that in Washington, she facilitates Republicans. Right. She claims to her base that she fights them. And the one time she's faced by a Democrat, by not ever showing up for a debate, she basically suppressed and did everything she could to suppress any attention to our campaign. I'll give you an example of this. One way that she worked to actively try to suppress it. There's a local network in town, Resistance SF. They do, among other things, nighttime projection actions. Okay. In many cases, actually supporting goals that the incumbent Nancy Pelosi has supported. Like when she was impeaching Trump, they were doing actually very supportive things with her then. And at one point, they were projecting many messages related to our campaign, including our campaign logo on the side of the federal building in San Francisco. It was a dope action, incredible images, very stoked for it. And sometime forward, the federal building, and there's a FOIA request that shook loose the documents to discover that her office had a role in installing floodlights to try to basically suppress speech in the form of projections on the side of the federal building. And
how much more can you just be a villain? I mean, what the hell? Like, let's put some floodlights to the fuck this guy.
Well, what's the best part about the story, though? So
What's
Resistance has
wrong with you?
upgraded their projectors, and then they can still project on the side of the building. They just outshine the floodlights. So there's an arms race as to lighting on the side of the federal building between a bunch of grassroots activists supporting our campaign and various, social movements, and the Speaker of the House, who, not for the first time and in the first way, but in a lot of ways, she actively suppresses speech, particularly by suppressing whistleblowers and keeping secrets out of the public view, that as a head of Congress, she's constitutionally obligated to fight for transparency. And as an agent of executive secrecy and in a lot of cases, crimes, I'm thinking of like CIA torture, right, or NSA surveillance, she is, let me put this another way. A lot of people see politics through a partisan political lens, Democrats, Republicans. I see politics particularly through a post-colonial lens and a constitutional lens, which is to see the reason I ran for the seat, and the reason I remain interested in making sure that Nancy Pelosi is retired as soon as possible, is because she ultimately, in the same way that Donald Trump as an aspiring fascist undermines the Republican democracy, she, as a head of Congress who is complicit with the executive branch and beholden to it, poses a constitutional threat to our democracy, in the same way that the press not showing up for work poses a constitutional threat to our democracy, in the same way that a right-wing Supreme Court with lifetime appointments poses a constitutional threat to our democracy. We have a litany of challenges, though frankly, Trump was, I wouldn't say the least of them. He was probably the most immediate, but the others remain.
He was the most visible. He was the most just on the surface right there.
Right.
And of course the others remain. I was laughing a little bit, not because of, of course, everything you're describing is absolutely horrible. I just love the aspiring fascist. You make it seem like it was like a job. He was like it was on a name tag for him, like Donald Trump, aspiring fascist.
Well, if he was in his second term, don't think he wouldn't put tyrant on a name tag with some gaudy uniform. He'd be dressing like Gaddafi or, Michael Jackson late in his career if he won the term. I mean, his inclination to pomp and circumstance and self-aggrandizement, I see the image you're constructing, and it's not far off of what I think we've just averted.
Well, and I don't want to go off on him too much, because there's just a lot of other stuff more particular I really want to talk to you about. But I had this theory that I was talking about like before the election, where I was like, if he wasn't a full-blown just narcissist, he would want to lose. Here's why. First of all, neither candidate really wants the job. With what we're facing with the pandemic, like neither candidate really wanted the job. I'm not convinced Biden wanted it. And I know Trump never wanted it in the first place.
Right.
He didn't want it in 2016. So if you're Donald Trump, you look around, you're like, I am in over my head. I have no business being president. This sucks. What I really want to do, what he's always wanted to do when the end of the day comes, he wanted to start a TV network. So he's like, look, if I lose this thing, I'm just going to cry foul on every little thing. I have my own marketing team in place with like QAnon and all those folks. So they'll do all the marketing for me. Then I start a TV network. Who doesn't love a martyr story? I mean, it's a bullshit martyr story, but a martyr story nonetheless. And then he's going to succeed at what Sarah Palin failed at. He has his network. Folks like you and I and anyone with any sense of decency will ignore it. He'll have his fans, though, and then he's happy.
It would be the smart play for him. I mean, I think
he would totally want to lose.
It discounts the extent to which he has a just direct financial interest in staying in office, right? The flip side of his corruption.
He'll figure out other ways to make money. Come on, they're plutocrats. Sure, he enriched himself in office. I don't disagree.
I think it would leave a lot of money on the table. And as much as he's a narcissist, he might be more greedy than he is self-centered. There's a question as to which of those values wins out, is all I'm saying.
But does a guy who claims bankruptcy 4 times always make the best financial decisions, Shahid?
Clearly not.
But enough about him. I want to get back to race. So
yeah.
So just to be like literal here, like she never even uttered your name, like just for like total, like she never. Okay, so
there is one time that her daughter did, though.
Oh, really? Was it right before blocking you on Twitter?
No, there was a New York Times article I woke up to in March talking about Christine Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's daughter, who's a member of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, calling Bernie Sanders to complain that Susan Sarandon had endorsed me. And it was like junior high school. The source
of all evil, Susan Sarandon.
I mean, it was like it. But what's so funny about it is it's like high school. But then none of these people talk to me. I mean, I have a connection to Susan, but like Christine doesn't talk to me. Bernie hasn't endorsed me. Pardon?
You're the one they don't want at the table. That's why it is like
Right.
high school, and you're the one they don't want at the lunch table.
That's right.
Susan Sarandon's not at the lunch table either, but they see her as a threat. She's at the neighboring lunch table where they can see her. And they're like, why do you like Shahid? Why do you like Shahid? We don't like Shahid.
And this was in the New York Times, but it was her daughter in a back channel that got reported. So that's the closest thing Nancy Pelosi ever got to acknowledging me, was her family reaching out to Bernie's team to try to complain about his endorsers also supporting me. And,
So,
I found that can I play that out though? Because there's an interesting story
sure.
on the back end of that. It relates to Bernie Sanders not endorsing our campaign and why I'm proud of it, which is a little counterintuitive.
Okay.
So I ran for office inspired by Bernie, and he did not endorse our campaign. And one reason why I'm proud of that is I think I played a role in basically getting Nancy Pelosi off his back. So we know that there's a lot of profound ideological tension between the two. After this New York Times article, the timing was recent, so I'm going to get some of the timing confused. This was 6 months ago. But around that time, Bernie's on the debate stage. Michael Bloomberg, who Nancy Pelosi had previously welcomed into the race.
Great guy.
Don't get me started on Michael Bloomberg.
Michael Bloomberg.
Well, actually, when we come back to the Biden administration and the theme of inviting Republicans into the cabinet, which I hope we get to.
Oh, we're going to talk about that later, Shahid.
Right. But, Bloomberg will come in here, and so we can talk about it then. But so Bloomberg says in this debate that if Bernie wins the nomination, Democrats lose the House. And the next day, Nancy Pelosi, to her credit, says, Bloomberg, as much as I welcomed him into the race, is wrong. Bernie winning the nomination would not cost Democrats the House. And I think one reason she said that was that she did not want to poke the bear of Bernie, the Me Too movement, or the Not Me Us movement and the Me Too movement, and the movement broadly that our campaign represented here in San Francisco. And the challenge for Bernie here is that as much as our principles align, going back to where you started with our interview, I faced the steepest hill in politics, right? The win number in our race is 250,000 votes. I won 75,000 votes. That's enough to win most congressional seats across the country. But, because of the nature of San Francisco, Pelosi's depth, the ownership of the media, its control, as we were describing, and its editorial decisions, which frankly rose to the level of racism here, the most racist experiences I've ever had in my life, having grown up in rural Missouri, were at the hands of the San Francisco press. And we can come to that.
No kidding.
All kinds of things to talk about there, but
we'll talk about a few of the highlights. Give me a racist highlight reel, please.
Sure. Well, 48 Hills, which formerly was the San Francisco Bay Guardian, and they publish a set of endorsements every year. They and Broke-Ass Stewart, a grassroots blog that had endorsed me in 2018, both declared me in 2020 unqualified, which I find so amusing because, just to be clear here, I taught at Stanford Law School 20 years ago. I helped secure marriage equality as a federal right. I've led multiple nonprofits. My work's been cited by U.S. senators. Multiple members of the House have asked me to brief their staffs, and colleagues in the House have been arrested for an act of journalism in the U.S. Senate. I've published dozens of articles, and local journalists who don't have anything resembling, frankly, I think even an awareness of my work, apparently, went to the level of declaring me as journalists, members of the press, in official statements out to the public, that I'm unqualified. And any number of candidates of color have been denigrated in that way. What I find amusing about it, though, is just the obvious failure of fact checking. I'm not prone to, I'm not bombastic. My older brother is very prone to boasting. It's one reason I'm not. But just to be clear, and I mean this objectively, and I think it's a fair statement, I don't know many people who have run for Congress who are more qualified than me in terms of their background and work impacting.
Well, and what qualifications does Nancy Pelosi have other than her ability to fundraise?
That is her qualification.
That's another valid question to ask.
Well, and there's a corollary to that, because if that is her only qualification and I am somehow unqualified, that's the press punching down and insulating power that in a way that isn't just, institutionally racist towards immigrants challenging power, but particularly insulating power from accountability. It's the press at its worst. That's the press stooping to the level of basically acting as state propaganda. And the reason I describe it as racist is because it just disregards 20 years of work. And, to do that to an immigrant and to present to the public this claim, unsupported claim, that I'm unqualified. And that's the same thing. People said the same thing about AOC. People said the same thing about Ilhan. anybody who challenges power is supposedly unqualified. And when you say that about immigrants of color, it has unfortunate dimensions. Or when the press, for instance, print hit pieces and then don't publish the stories about when various smears get debunked. All of these are, examples of racism that infects an institutional press here. And this is another point I'd want to make clear, that has borne no accountability for it. No one at the San Francisco Chronicle or 48 Hills or Broke-Ass Stewart has acknowledged their failures in printing the stories that they did, in failing to issue corrections, in not checking their facts. These are failures that remain effectively uncorrected. And I'm not, I'm running against Pelosi, and my concerns are the CIA and stopping wars abroad, not fixing the racism in the local press corps in San Francisco.
Sure.
But, as I'm talking about the holes in the colander of our democracy, it's among them. And it's one that, as a candidate confronting an entrenched power holder in San Francisco, who, as you described, just did not show up for the obligation of presenting herself to the constituency, someone so entitled that she hasn't defended her ideas in public since Ronald Reagan was the president. Before Bush's father was the president, was the last time Nancy Pelosi ever debated someone. And I just see that.
Well, I have a theory on this. I have a theory on this since you bring up the debate portion. First of all, I believe full-heartedly she knew who you were. She knew who you were. What I think we can look to as to why you were not granted a debate, we can look to AOC and Crowley. When AOC was granted a debate,
she destroyed him.
Well, not just she destroyed him. Yes, she did. She certainly destroyed him, and it was beautiful to watch. But what that also does, when you are an incumbent, especially a powerful one, especially one as powerful as a Nancy Pelosi, when you grant your opponent that debate, you do validate them. You say to general, and the press validates them too, and it says to a general voter, hey, you do have a choice. Do you want more of the same? Or do you want this person who has some new ideas, who has some different perspectives, who's speaking a language you might not have heard before? I mean, it's easy for us in our progressive bubbles to think this is a common language, the language of Medicare for all, of a Green New Deal. And it's slowly becoming one. But there's still a lot of people where it's not that apparent that that's a choice. Absolutely. That's still a hurdle to overcome. And I think
absolutely agree with that, but I wouldn't frame it as the incumbent granting anything.
No. I know. I meant that in like the metaphorical sense. Like from their end, they're like, I'm not going to do that because that's empowering my opponent.
Right. That's absolutely, you nailed it. I think that's right. I just think of it through, I think the lens maybe you do as well, that because you used this frame earlier, these are people, any person on a ballot is auditioning for a public role, and for incumbents to so presume their incumbency, to demonstrate the entitlement not to debate or acknowledge their opponents, to try to obscure their records, and frankly coast to re-election, betting on the ignorance of the electorate, people not realizing that she funded Trump's concentration camps and handed him his military budgets and expanded his surveillance powers while limiting her so-called resistance to photo ops. If San Francisco knew that, there's no way that 200,000 people would have voted for her. They only voted for, 200,000 people voted for Pelosi because they fell for a ruse. And this is why I blame the press for not showing up, because again, that's not the incumbent's role. I mean, the incumbent, I think you're right, is correctly, or at least as not correctly, but strategically gaming the system. But the reason she was able to get away with that is because the San Francisco Chronicle, KQED, KALW, KPIX, the local ABC, NBC, CBS affiliates, none of them showed up for work for 3 years. And I do think that is.
Oh, absolutely. And I think part of it too, they didn't just rely on people not really knowing what Pelosi actually does. Of course they rely on that, but they also rely on people not knowing there's an actual choice. They want people to just think, oh man, Republicans, it's getting gruesome out there. Trump is a special kind of gruesome. We got to just stay with what we know. I don't know who this other guy is because there wasn't a debate. I just got to stay with what I know. I'm going to vote Pelosi. That's what I know. That's what they're relying on people to do. And Pelosi knows that.
Yep.
So she's going to do everything in her power to make sure that stays the case. And one of the things she can do very easily is make sure she doesn't show up for a debate.
Well, it shouldn't be easy is my point.
I agree. I completely agree.
Right. If the press writes And there was one story in the Chronicle a week before I was smeared for a whole bunch of things. But the Chronicle wrote one story about Pelosi ignoring calls for debate, and not a single broadcast outlet, picked that up. And that's, how many people read the newspaper. It's disappointing to me to see the levers of our democracy crumble. And, whether that's, again, the co-optation of the Supreme Court by a right-wing appointment, which I'll just drop, incidentally, was facilitated by Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein.
Yes,
two San Francisco Democrats.
They did not. There's so many. Everyone's like, well, the Senate, they couldn't have. No. They could have had bill after bill after bill that would have had to have been given precedents that could have stalled it. They could have just easily done. They could have been like, here's a funny bill, like whatever it was. They could have just thrown that at them. They could have brought up the whole impeachment thing. Remember that circus where they didn't look at Trump's real crimes? Which you were one of the few people who told that story of, hey, this is all the stuff they're not looking at because they're complicit in it. They could have brought that up. They could have brought, so many things they could have done, and they tried nothing. Like, were they guaranteed to for sure stop it no matter what? Not necessarily, just to be, fair politically.
That's right.
But they tried nothing. Like, absolutely nothing.
Pelosi promised to use all the arrows in her quiver, and it was suggested to me that her arrows were all Nerfs, except they weren't even, like, that's clever, except that my response was that's charitable, because she didn't even have Nerf arrows. She didn't fire any. She used none of the tools available to her. And the point I want to make about not just Pelosi, but Dianne Feinstein, in her softball questions as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, they are both Democrats, powerful Democrats representing San Francisco. Of all the cities in the country whose voices in Congress would pave the road to the right wing securing a generation-long grip on the Supreme Court, for San Francisco's voices to be playing that role, I am frankly offended by. It would be one thing for, Houston, Texas's voices in Congress to be doing that, but for San Francisco, and I frankly think that the city should be aware of this, and I don't think, frankly, San Francisco has any idea. I don't think the rest of California, frankly, understands. Like, the role of this city is, frankly,
no, people think progressive. People think California is some progressive utopia, and there is no progressive utopia in the United States. There just isn't.
Yep. Our state ballot propositions really demonstrated it. We lost a bunch of state ballot propositions that were very exciting and should have passed.
Well, hold that thought, because I want to talk to you about 22 in particular.
Yeah.
And 24. But first, let's stay on you for a little bit before we move off of you. What do you think you might do next?
My plan over the next several months, at least, is to reflect, convalesce, get my legs back under me. I'm exhausted.
Well, yeah, you got to relax for a little bit, dude, or you're nuts. If you were just like, I'm doing a thing tomorrow, I'd be like, okay, buddy, I'm not like we're not like, if I was like a family member or a very, very close friend who's known you for years, I'd have an intervention and be like, no, dude, you gotta take a frickin' nap. Maybe do some DJing. You got to unwind a little bit.
If there weren't a pandemic, that's what I would be doing, is DJing. But
you can do it virtually. You can do it virtually. You can do it. Some of my DJ friends, they Instagram it out. You could do that.
Well, I am making some music. I just released a track, actually, the day that Trump got COVID, titled "Justice" of all things. It felt very ironic. But yeah, I plan to make some music. I plan to snowboard a little bit if I can get, find a place that's open during the pandemic. I do think that my next phase beyond this for me is, it's unclear. I am exploring a 2022 run. A lot of people have suggested to me something regarding the Senate. I'm skeptical of that, if only because, frankly, I'd really love to see Ro Khanna in the Senate. And he's somebody who I think would have a stronger shot at the seat, either the one vacated by Harris or, one of the ones that's going to come up in the future. There is a very likely possibility that I'll run for the House seat in 2022. I'll be particularly eager to do that if Nancy Pelosi chooses, for some reason, not to retire. She has pledged to give up the gavel in 2022 without being specific about her plans beyond that. I would love to give her the opportunity to enjoy her retirement and give San Francisco a new voice in Congress, and eager to, whether that's me serving in that role or someone else advocating the principles that I and the movement support, remains to be seen. I'm not sure what the field will look like. One reason I'll put this out there, I ran for Congress particularly because I was misrepresented by the incumbent. And if she does retire, I expect any number of, likely half a dozen people, to step into the race. And, most of them are not nearly as far left as me. They do all have established political careers, which would make it challenging to confront them. It might also create opportunities because the careerists will likely split a bunch of votes. And so I'd have a chance to consolidate support perhaps on the left. Lots of factors there. The future remains to be seen.
Well, what about something at a city level? Does that interest you at all? I mean, it seems like you want to stay in electoralism, which you could or you couldn't. I mean, you could go the activist route too. You can go any route you want.
Well, that's where I was just going to go. I came from nonprofits fighting the national security complex.
Right.
And that's what I'm pledged to do. And I only ran for Congress because it would give me more opportunities to do that. Right. So the other way to put it is that I can't fight the CIA or the NSA from City Hall or the school board. So if I was interested in a political career or electoralism, yes, I would do that. But I'm not actually. Those aren't my primary commitments. My primary commitments are to defending the Constitution of the United States and the principal threats to it, among the holes in the colander. People are focused on the courts. Some people are focused on the media. Nobody's focused, or at least nobody in electoral politics is focused on the national security agencies. Ron Wyden to some extent, Justin Amash to some extent, few others. And those are the issues that inspired me to run. I'm an immigrant who saw the role of national security agencies in undermining the security of the United States and subverting its promises with something more authoritarian, or at least the possibility of it. Donald Trump presented a particularly visible threat in how it might grow politicized. With him gone, the looming threat that state omniscience or indefinite detention or arbitrary profiling or the suppression of speech and dissent and transparency and whistleblowers, the threat to democracy that those things present, those also continue to grow and loom. And I'm committed to fighting those. And if that might be, conceivably in some role, relating to journalism, I see you and many of the voices who, have given me opportunities to get our voice out there as, potential role models and helping educate the public. I should say this too. We won 75,000 votes, and that's more than any previous challenger to Pelosi by far in her 30-year career. And so I'm proud of that. One of the functions, this was a thing that was lost on my staff during the primary. One of the functions of the campaign is to educate the electorate. This is why a debate, frankly, would be such an important thing for the community to understand how we've been represented in Washington. And I'm very proud to have played that role, I think, quite effectively. I've gotten a lot of feedback from a lot of different people and a lot of different channels at a lot of different times, saying different versions of, I never realized XYZ until I heard it from you, or, I learned about this or that from hearing your voice. And, if there's anything I can share that helps people better understand the landscape of the issues we confront or the history, or adds a layer or a lens to their established analysis, I'm humbled to offer that. And could be the case that, a media programming combining a media platform, combining house music and political commentary and interviews with insightful people, perhaps like yourself, that might be a possible future. Again, I don't know. I know I'm going to be taking some time off to try to figure it out, get my feet under me. And
oh yeah, dude, you got to reset. I mean, you've earned that. You got to reset a little bit. Well, then let's get into some propositions. Prop 24, the internet privacy issue. Where were you at? Because that was a very tough one.
It was, and it's got an interesting backstory. I ultimately voted against it for the same reasons that the ACLU opposed it.
Okay, so I voted against it too. But it was, I almost left it blank because it was really tough. I mean, so many. I didn't mean to interject there, but it's like just to give the people like a little bit of backstory if it's not fresh in their minds. So that was an internet privacy bill that had a couple good elements, and then a couple bad ones. Where it was like good element, they're going to make it harder for people to get your data. People being big businesses and stuff like that. Bad element, well, you have to pay for the privilege. Good element, there's some protections in there for children and stuff like that. Bad element, it's not really transparent across state lines, and there's some security issues. And another bad element, if this doesn't work out the way we want it to when it's unrolled, it's going to be hard to undo. ACLU was the most vocal against it. Even the DSA was like, this one's tough. We can't endorse it. We can't say no either. Do you? DSA said that. And I forget it. There was someone else who said that. There were a lot of people that just said no opinion because it was just too, 6 of one, but then 6 the other way. And it's like, geez, the ACLU was the most vocal against it. So why don't you take that part over?
Yeah, well, so one reason they were against it is because because it goes through a proposition process rather than a legislative process, doesn't particularly lend itself to amendments. And it speaks to the value of expertise. My former colleagues at EFF had an analysis very similar to the one you described, and part of the concern was if this had been drafted by, for instance, public interest groups with an eye towards digital privacy, it would have not had all the counterproductive elements, but it was the product. And this is, I don't know quite how to frame this. It was the product of a billionaire interested in privacy. And this suggests oligarchy as our governing policy paradigm. It's a proposition process, so it's straight to the people, smells like democracy, except the propositions in these cases are being written by, in this case, a relatively benevolent billionaire. But when we have benevolent billionaires fighting tech through the open arena of our democracy, what does that suggest about what actually is going on here? And, we shouldn't be reliant on the whims of oligarchs or people with deep pockets. This is the value of expertise, of institutions. And I wish, frankly, that, when the organization headed by the real estate billionaire that launched this proposition, I wish they brought in some experts to advise what they were doing instead of just having the billionaire's lawyers draft the thing. Yeah. It's a disappointing process. I will say, the way it all came to be is an interesting reflection also of the same process, because the same billionaire 2 years ago, it might have been 3 years ago, introduced a ballot measure, not unlike 24. And the reason we got the California State Privacy Act, which was a leading law across the country and the world, frankly, not unlike the GDPR and the EU, the Global Data Protection Requirement passed in the European Union, the California Consumer Privacy Act was passed, within like 36 hours. They introduced and passed the bill through the state assembly and the Senate. Well, when has that ever happened? It's unheard of. And the reason it happened is because big tech was so alarmed by the ballot proposition that there was a deal made with the billionaire. If you pull your proposition before this deadline, we'll write a law that will include many of its provisions, but it'll be through the legislative process, and we big tech and you privacy people, you guys can figure it out. So the state legislature, both the assembly and the Senate, raced to make it happen, bid both by the billionaire privacy advocate and the tech firms. They passed the law. It had a bunch of ambiguities. The nonprofits and the state government and the AG's office and the big tech companies have been fighting about it ever since. And the real estate billionaire with the interest in privacy came back to the table a few years later and said, I've been waiting for you guys to figure this out for 3 years. Nothing is in place. We're just going to go back to the well and do it again. And that's kind of what happened here. And, it's an interesting reflection, again, both of dynamics of oligarchy subverting, though in this case also informing, though in weird ways subverting our democracy. It's an interesting failure.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's the thing. There's no easy way to unpack that one. It's just and yes, I voted against it for the same reasons. And the ACLU was they were the most definitive on it. Like, this is not the privacy bill we need. Right. It did pass, and I think, and I mean, let me know what you think of this, because maybe this is being too optimistic. I don't, the biggest reason I voted against it, to just put it in the most simple nuts and bolts, I didn't see it as a step forward. I saw it as, at best, a sidestep.
Yep.
And I have a feeling that's what it's going to end up being. It's going to just sort of be a sidestep. So the optimism there is, well, it's not necessarily a step backwards.
It's a sidestep with a spin move, in the sense that it creates new fronts, and there are some opportunities, but also new threats. The pay for privacy dimension that you described, that basically starts to create digital haves and have-nots. The internet, if anything, historically has been egalitarian, and that is a principle that is now being threatened. And that's a new front, a new looming threat, and it could become massive to not just internet users, but the digital space that we know as an alternative to this one. People forget that digital spaces can be profoundly liberatory if you have a speech impediment, or if you have a physical disability, or if you're, geographically, isolated. Cyberspace can be a really liberatory opportunity to escape the confines of your body or your place, your community, your family, possibly, right? And for now, or the possibility of our established systems of social stratification to be reintroduced into online spaces that previously were relatively immune to them. That is disturbing to me, and it should be disturbing to others. You might think of this as capitalism starting to eat the internet. Not that that didn't happen long ago, but in a new way that would, again, create digital haves and have-nots to an even greater degree than we have before.
Well, it's more like digital rights activists are standing at the front line, blocking the lions that are the capitalists from the lambs on the other side. And that fence is they're constantly trying to break down that fence. And
they like moved. Maybe
and
the fence moved.
Though the fence is always moving, and I mean, especially, there has been a lot of damage done to that fence by the Trump administration. There's no getting around that. They gutted net neutrality. Yeah. Trump's executive order is a disaster, and some people are misinterpreting what that would actually do. It's a disaster. And by the way, Trump's not working alone here. It has bipartisan support. Biden's for it too. So, we got a long way to go in the digital rights space. Yeah. The one glimmer of optimism here is that more and more people are realizing the internet's a public utility in their life. And how much so?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that emboldens stronger antitrust regulation. A lot of people are suggesting treating ISPs like utilities, and that's not crazy. I would like to see.
No, we had it a couple years ago. Right? It's not crazy. We had it since the advent of the internet. First of all, we had it since the advent of the internet, and we had that as a law a couple years ago. We can go a step further and just build that ourselves by having municipal broadband all around the country, which, by the way, right. Bernie Sanders had a plan for it. Bernie Sanders, and who I think, I mean, you mentioned Ro Khanna. I guarantee Ro was the bug in his ear on a lot of those digital rights issues. Totally. And, I don't agree with Ro Khanna on everything. I've had some disagreements with him. But when it comes to net neutrality and those types of issues, Ro is one of the few people in elected office that gets those right and stays on top of it. Him and who's the guy in Oregon?
Ron Wyden.
Yes, yeah, Wyden's pretty good on that.
That's right.
Yeah, but there's just a small handful. And even Scott Wiener, who I have a lot of disagreements with that guy on a lot of issues, but he wrote a good net neutrality bill. So the policies out there, especially in California. I mean, what I would love to see happen is that, that high-speed internet for all bill in the country that, is now going away as Bernie is not going to be the next president. But, well, what if we tried to do that state by state? And what if we start right here in California?
And that's exactly what digital rights activists have been pressing for. It's one reason why the California Consumer Privacy Act was a California state bill and law, and something that, frankly, people were, to a large extent, trying to keep out of Congress's hands. There's a concern that if Congress does anything at the moment, it will be, frankly, not in the public interest, which is why the states present opportunities in the same way that Justice Brandeis 100 years ago invited and envisioned them as laboratories. State present opportunities to try different methods and structures. Before the ACA was the ACA, it was Mitt Romney's healthcare plan in the state of Massachusetts, which is, frankly, one reason why people might have forecast some of the challenges that it went on to present. Why Medicare for all might be a better alternative, but I digress.
It's a better alternative. There's no if there. It's a better alternative.
Right. No, yeah, exactly. Medicare for all is absolutely.
I know you're just being polite, but
just a riff on that really quick. Georgia, a lot of people are looking at Georgia now because of the special Senate elections happening. There is polling there and elsewhere suggesting that Medicare for all is a bipartisan majority favored policy. And corporate Democrats right now.
The Fox News poll. Fox News, of all places, 72%. 72% of people.
And yet corporate Democrats are trying to lean on the state Senate, the Georgia U.S. Senate candidates not to embrace it. And it's interesting to note that in the congressional elections that just happened, every single Democrat who lost their seat opposed it. And every Democrat who supports Medicare for all won their reelection. And so the future has written itself. It is inescapably clear. And the question is, when do corporate Democrats, including Joe Biden, figure it out? And I'm very eager to hold their feet to the fire and make sure that happens sooner rather than later.
So let's get to one more prop, and then I got one more story I want to share with you. Proposition 22. Oh. That was exactly. I figured that was going to be your reaction. So to refresh everybody's memory, Prop 22. Here in California, we have a piece of legislation called AB 5, which is a piece of legislation that makes you designate people who are essential to a business. You have to designate them employees and treat them as such. There was a lot of concern about this bill because people were worried it was an overreach. And when you have a place like California where there's a lot of people where an employee designation would not make sense for them, people like actors and comedians like me and broadcasters and what have you. So there was some concern. But here's the thing. AB 5 had those carve-outs, which I don't know about you. I took the time to read the thing. I read the bill. And I was like, I don't see what people are freaking out about because the carve-outs are very apparent. And does it need some massaging? Sure, it does, like most legislation does. And you know what they did, Shahid? They started massaging it. The musicians union wrote a thing. They were like, hey, we got to make sure we're part of the carve-outs. You have journalists listed. You got to have musicians listed too, because it doesn't make sense for us. If the venue we're playing at has to designate us an employee, that screws over everybody. You realize that doesn't make sense, right? And people were like, yes, of course that doesn't make sense. We're freaking California. We're not going to screw over creatives any more than we already do, at least. But, so the carve-outs were very apparent, but a lot of people were concerned about this because you had places like Lyft and Uber make this big propaganda campaign against it because guess what? Guess who doesn't pass the carve-out test? People who are driving for Lyft and Uber. You know why? Because they're essential to that frickin' business. Because the business is you get a frickin' ride somewhere. They're like, oh no, it's just our service just connects people. Yeah, okay, it connects people, but they don't get a ride. See how long you stay in business if you do that. Yeah, we're just connecting people. Oh, okay, so the next time someone logs into Uber or Lyft, they're going to say, hey, I need a ride somewhere. And then it connects them with someone. It's like, hey, I'm able to give you a ride somewhere. Oh, are you going to give me that ride then? No. This is just connecting us. I could give you a ride, but instead I'm going to go in the corner and fuck myself. You should do the same. Let's see how long they stay in business if that's the essential business they provide. Clearly, the drive is the essential service that's provided, so they should all be employees. And guess what? All those arguments like, oh, well, we need flex schedules. There are flex schedules for employees all over the frickin' world, all over the country and all over the world. There were so many ways Uber and Lyft could have accommodated everybody, could have made full-time driver status, and those people would have been designated employees. And then guess what? When you measure what a full workload is for the demand that you have, after that, you can have drivers that are part-time where the workload goes to them when the queue is full. So the people who just kind of do it on the side, they're still taken care of. They still have opportunities. And they would be exempt from AB 5. You know why? Or they would be exempt from employee status. You know why they would be? Because they wouldn't be considered. They would meet the test where they do that service elsewhere. So they wouldn't be considered essential employees because they're not part of the full workload. They're part of the excess workload. So they're not necessarily essential. And also they do the driving for other places and they're not told how they can drive. So they would fit it. So basically there was a way where people would have been designated, full-time people would have been employees. They would have been treated right. And Uber and Lyft, with all the money they spent beating this thing, with all the money they spent on 22, they could have spent that money just tweaking their service and taking care of people. It could have easily been done. I just described it, and everything I described would have been sound within that policy. And it would have been fair to everyone involved. For the drivers who drive full-time, they'd be treated better. For the people who, hey, it's just a side thing, I supplement my income with a little bit, they would still have opportunities. And the people at the top, by the way, still be fucking rich as hell. Everybody would win. But they couldn't be as greedy as they wanted to be. So instead, they pumped millions into convincing Californians to vote against their own interests.
You nailed it. And when you described how the people at the top would still be wealthy, the difference is that the investors and to some extent executives of these companies wouldn't be quite as wealthy. And that's the issue here is, the marginal class interests of the 0.1%, not just driving bad corporate policies, but in this case, driving a successful concerted corporate campaign across many different platforms, Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and Instacart. They successfully gamed our democracy. And, across a set of industrial interests shared by these largely tech firms. And it's worth noting too, these are tech firms that got big by basically exploiting weakness in the labor market. If you think about the ways that drivers for Uber and Lyft were in, the people performing that service in the past were people represented in taxi associations. The tech firms, their value add, let's say, what they propose economically to introduce the equation is an efficiency. It's an efficiency born by cutting labor rights out of the equation. So already built into their model to some extent is this level of potentially exploitative policy. But then to go beyond that and wage this campaign across the state to, as you put it, convince Californians to vote against their interests and vote effectively to put more money in the pockets of executives at Uber and Lyft. I saw an interesting notice from one of those companies claiming that now that 24 had passed, they would be able to offer some of their independent contractors insurance. And it was so obviously disingenuous because they were able to do it before.
Right.
And they peddled all of these soft, like union light alternatives, like, oh, we'll give some people healthcare. Oh, there'll be some opportunities for people to be represented in some process that the companies will limit and control. Like they dangled these carrots that looked like carrots that were frankly just admissions from their own previous intransigence and unwillingness to accept. And they used those to bait people into supporting a law that ultimately just entrenched those companies' interests even further. And the idea that California voted to entrench the interests of online companies that exploit labor and voted not to, for instance, force businesses to pay their fair share in property taxes is, again, a reflection to me of capitalism subverting democracy, even here in our supposedly most progressive state. And I fear where
rent control didn't make it. Rent control didn't make it. I mean,
the opportunity for cities to decide their own rent control policies. But yes, that's right.
Right. Yeah. But it's like anything that has rent control in the sentence just doesn't make it. I mean, that happened in 2018. It happened again. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Like, what are people? It's in 22. It's like they put so much into that thing, and yeah, I mean, all the money they spent, they could have just spent reassessing making themselves compliant, and just treating their employees. Well, they don't have them, but treating their contractors as employees as they should be, and treating them fairly. Like it wasn't that hard.
Just really a quibble. I agree with you that they should have. The only reason I think it wasn't easy for them is that as much as that might have made sense with respect to the assessment in California, they're not fighting over California. They're fighting a global precedent. And that's what I particularly fear here is that by passing Prop 22, these companies have AB5 was groundbreaking. It was the first jurisdiction to say to these tech companies, it's the one they grew up in, no, you're not just going to have your way with workers. Like, worker rights will survive your tech innovations. Prop 22 passing is the tech companies being like, no, thank you very much. We're going to make up our own labor right regime.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a precedent.
And this, yeah, exactly. The stakes there globally, because they're going to take 24 everywhere. They might have been fighting in California, but for them, it was a beachhead, and they don't plan to be finished there. And if they lost 24, if AB5
22.
Sorry, 22. I was
just so people don't get confused.
Thank you. 24 is the privacy one.
Yeah.
If they lost Prop 22 and AB5 remained good law, unfettered by the erosion by the companies, then AB5 would have set a precedent that would have spread across the world and the country.
Yeah. Such a missed opportunity, and we managed to screw over the rest of the country.
And the world. These are global industries. They're not going to limit to undermining the rights of American workers. I mean, that, in the same way that I was describing the spin move of Prop 24 and creating these digital haves and have-nots, a whole new threat to democracy and free speech online. In the same way, Prop 22 passing exports potentially exports and often exploitative labor market model to other markets. It creates another threat to labor rights and participation, not just in the United States, but I think about anybody who drives for a living anywhere. They're in the pipeline for being made redundant by, someone taken advantage of by Uber or Lyft in their models. And I do fear, and it's not even so much the case of just the labor rights and these particular platforms, but think of it one layer more abstract. If companies can contrive any democratic process to skew public policy in their favor, that leads to very dark places. And I think that's the precedent that ultimately got set here. Instacart, DoorDash, Lyft, Uber, they demonstrated that companies can dictate policy even through the ballot proposition process, which is supposed to be quintessentially democratic. So in the, I was talking before about the real estate billionaire with the interest in privacy, demonstrating how oligarchy sort of subsumes our democracy. It's the same story here, but with corporate interests instead of individual fortunes. We see, again, capital subverting democratic processes. And I find that at the most abstract level, most disturbing. It's yet another hole in the colander of our democracy.
Nailed it. Yeah, nailed it. So let's go here last to end. This is a little bit of a fun one. So fun's a weird way to put it. Fun's a weird way to put it. So Joe Biden has already spoken. According to a couple different sources, he is leaning on Mitt Romney to potentially head up Health and Human Services. He's looking to Mitt Romney, according to a couple sources, as of the recording of this. Here's what Mitt Romney had to say recently. This is a doozy. Let's watch it.
I'm not going to talk about my vote. That's in the rearview mirror. I'm going to talk now about how I can work with the new president. I know he's on the other side of the aisle, but I want to make sure that we conservatives keep on fighting to make sure that we don't have a Green New Deal. We don't get rid of gas and coal and oil, that we don't have a Medicare for all plan put in place, that we don't raise taxes on American enterprise. That would kill the economy. So, look, I congratulate him. But I'm not going to put aside conservative principles. We're going to fight for the things that we believe.
So that we don't have a Green New Deal, so that we don't have Medicare for all, so that children can still work in factories, so that we don't outlaw just punching someone you don't like in the face if they're poor. So we don't. I mean, it's like they're just villains. And then he's saying Joe Biden is on the other side of we are the only Democratic experiment, pseudo-democratic, so-called Democratic experiment, where Joe Biden wouldn't be considered far right.
Right.
In any other, he'd be considered far right. And Mitt Romney's like, well, we're trying to, I mean, we are a cartoon at this point. It is unbelievable. Our Overton window is so far to the right, they had to buy a new camera to zoom out far enough. It's freaking insane. I mean, I remember, this was so funny. I was leaving for my Australian tour. This was back when touring was still a thing. And I was leaving for Australia, and a family friend goes, oh, are you a little nervous about performing in Australia? And I was like, well, why do you say that? And she goes, well, I know you're really political. They're a little more conservative in Australia. And I was just like, what country do you think we live in? Like I was just like, what do you... Like, do you think I exclusively perform in Denmark? Like, you realize I perform in the United States, right? Like that's where I'm based. Like, I was like, if you're asking me how would I do in a country more conservative than the U.S., I don't know. Get back to me when Yemen calls to book me, and I'll let you know. We're gonna make sure we don't. That's the guy for Health and Human Services, Mitt Romney. Now,
can I just a riff here that kind of remixes Mitt Romney and your friend's attitude about Australia? Americans claim that I think about our current president and his denigration of shithole countries. Right? Americans think that we have such a great deal, right? We want to let the rest of the world live up to our standard. We want to be magnanimous, right? This is implicit in the whole presumption of policing the rest of the world. We don't even have the same rights as people in other countries. You don't have a right to healthcare in the United States. You don't even have a right to make it home at night without getting shot by a paid agent of the state who's supposedly there to keep the community safe.
And they allow those, quote, agents of the state to commit war crimes against their own people. They allow them to use tear gas.
Americans need to grapple with what is happening here and its implications. We are not the leader of the free world. We might be the leader of something, but we're not even in the free world. You can't claim to be free when we have more people incarcerated than any country in the entire planet.
We're the leader of an empire. That's what we're the leader of. We're the leader of imperialism. We're the leader of, and that's a very typical, I mean, hell, even in the dystopian movies, that's how the empire is. The people are oppressed. Well, they spread their empire around the world. They spread imperialism around the world at the behest of a few really rich people, a few very corrupt, evil rich people. That's exactly what we are.
I wouldn't say a few. I would just say categorically rich people and institutions. Capital is bigger than a few rich people. Capital is its own behemoth, and it commands institutions. And the only reason I raise this is I think it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking it's us versus the 0.1%. But even the 0.1% can't fight capital. They own it, but they don't control it. Capital has its own interests in accreting and accumulating, and it transcends who has it. This is one reason why we have to recognize the threat to human liberty as existing in things that we have built, like corporations, which are not people, but they accrete capital and they have their own interests and they assert.
Well, yeah, I mean, capitalism's the disease. And when you really read a lot of the philosophers, like when you go back and you read so many of them, including ones that are even lauded as conservative, people like Adam Smith, like they warned against ever doing what we've done. I mean, if you really read Proudhon, that guy warned against ever doing anything like Wall Street. They put it in different terminology because this is going back a while, but they warned against ever creating a situation where you just had capital relying on other capital, relying on other capital. If we like let's say we had a complete new world and all of our preconceived notions were just unknown, and a group of 6 of us or so met in a room and we're talking about ways on how we should organize our society. If somebody described capitalism, everybody would think that person was literally insane. They would think that person had problems. They'd be worried about, they would take that person to a doctor immediately. If someone was like, I got this idea, so money is the thing, and we always got to make more of it. We got to make more of it. And then a couple people have a lot of it and they put it back in, and then they make bets on if a thing's going to make money or not. And then when it makes money, it goes back to the shareholders so they can start another thing that makes money. And then they'll make bets on if it makes money or not. And then from those bets, that makes more money. And then they'll make bets on the bets on the bets, and that makes more money. And then, well, does the money go to the workers? No. Where do they get the money in the first place? All of us. You're insane, Steve. You got to see a doctor. You have problems. You did
a good job of summarizing it. The bets on the bets.
That's on the our bets. System. It's nuts.
Yeah.
It's freaking nuts.
And we accept it's just normal. Like, I think, again, we're being charitable because what you're describing, I think, is how someone would describe like classical capitalism, except that also isn't exactly what we practice. I was talking to a friend just this morning, actually, who was trying to, they're asking me about the difference between neoconservatism and neoliberalism. And we talked about it for a while. And at root, like, the most elegant way I could capture it was it's the difference between exploiting foreign markets through Wall Street, that's neoliberalism, or exploiting foreign markets through the CIA and the military industrial complex, that's neoconservatism. And the key is that they are intertwined. Yes. We don't have just Wall Street. We have this other thing too. And so even if Wall Street was defensible, the invisible fist of the invisible hand, that is not in any way defensible.
This is the invisible hand. That's the invisible hand right here. That's the invisible hand, Billy.
And maybe just to, again, if I can tie 2 pieces together, as we're talking about this sort of like, iron fist, let's say, of the invisible hand that the CIA and the Pentagon represent, you were talking about our imperial practices. It's, in mass incarceration, indefinite detention, CIA torture, police shootings, we could go on, in detention camps, right, with Nazi eugenics practices. We remain the only country in the entire world that has used weapons of mass destruction targeting civilian populations. And it's important. The reason I raise that is that this has a connection to San Francisco. The bombs that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki 70 years ago, they were built in San Francisco at a shipyard that has basically been radiation poisoned. An entire neighborhood, the last Black enclave in San Francisco, Hunters Point, has asthma rates and breast cancer rates among the highest in the world because we didn't just drop weapons of mass destruction on foreign populations. We managed to poison Americans to build those weapons. And this is how our chickens, frankly, never left to need to come home to roost. They have come home to roost for sure, but we never exported them in the first place. Americans have been harmed by our military industrial complex from the very beginning. And when I see the role that it plays in facilitating and accelerating the climate catastrophe as a further way of undermining not just national security of the United States, but frankly, our species. And I see that all connected here too, when you talk about the indefensibility of neoliberalism and Joe Biden bringing into his administration and cabinet conservatives. I want to just make sure that we're not taking our eye off the ball of the darker looming and the secret problems that frankly have escaped attention for years, right? I mean, the last time I even heard anybody say much about the CIA was when it was hiding evidence of its criminal trail into torture. And that was many years ago that they've escaped the cover up for that. The CIA very likely was involved in coups across Latin America under the Trump administration and has escaped any public accountability for it. One of the particular reasons they've escaped public accountability for it is because Nancy Pelosi has served as a constitutional agent of the executive branch, even while leading a branch of Congress. But I digress.
Well, and because she knew about some stuff that if it ever really became public that she knew about it, she could be in a little bit of trouble.
Yes. I mean, this is one of the issues I ran on. She knew about CIA torture as early as 2002.
Yep.
She was read into the program. And in 2006, she was the Speaker of the House. And what did she do about it? Not a damn thing. And she represents a city where the United Nations was founded. San Francisco, if we have any commitments at all, human rights is at the very bedrock of our local consensus. It finds expression in lots of different ways. We're a sanctuary city. We welcome immigrants and migrants, even to the point of resisting the federal government. And that's a human rights driven commitment. We favor climate justice because we favor the interests of future generations. Yet we have a voice in Congress who favors Wall Street instead of our city's principles. And nowhere for me does it grow sharper or more alarming than Nancy Pelosi's participation in the continuing, still after 20 years, there is a continuing cover up over CIA human rights abuses under the Bush administration that no one has ever been held accountable for. In fact, it was someone who participated in the destruction of evidence of the CIA's criminal trail who now heads the agency. And I'm not okay with that at all, by a mile. That is absolutely incompatible, not just with our principles, but with our founding documents. That is unconstitutional. And we have treaties that we accepted as the law of the land after the Second World War, which we fought at great cost to establish an international human rights regime that we now violate every day. And I care too much about those principles and the generation that made so many sacrifices and the generations that will have to bear the cost if we don't guard the gate and hold on to human rights. And it's precisely Nancy Pelosi's failure to do that that drove me to run against her.
There you go. And so some inspiring words there from Mitt Romney. He's going to make sure his life's work is to make sure not everybody has health care and that we don't actually do what needs done on the climate. He's going to hold on to those principles of not doing what needs to happen. Let's go to some thoughts. Let's go to the super chat. What's up, everybody? Dan Campbell, thank you very much. I hope you're doing amazing, Dan. Good to see you. Omar says, keep running, Shahid. Does local interest you at all?
Local politics?
Yeah, like
we talked about this. I'm in it to fight three-letter agencies. It's the only thing I care about the Green New Deal. I care about Medicare for all. But the reason I ran for Congress is that I can help fight the agencies. I don't think my voice on land use questions or governing a school district, I don't think there's a lot I can contribute there. But I can help with guarding our democracy. I can help fill one of the holes in the colander. So, you're kind of asking me, like, would I go do, instead of try to fix that, go do something else? I'm not here to build my career. My career is not my interest. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
No. I got you. I just think you'd be an asset to a city council is all I'm saying.
I mean, I think I'd be thoughtful, but anybody could do that. There's lots of people who could do that. And I don't think, I don't know anybody who spent 20 years fighting the agencies. And I frankly want to get anybody with my background into Congress. And if, there's a guy, for instance, who ran in Western North Carolina, who was the former chief military prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay, who resigned his seat to stop torture. Morris Davis is his name, Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, rose to the chief ranks of the military establishment as the senior military prosecutor. And he stood for human rights. He gave up his career, joined the Congressional Research Service, ended up being represented by the ACLU at one point. Like, he's the kind of voice, I want voices like his and voices like mine that have done the hard work of standing up for human rights. I want people like us in Congress. And I don't think there's much I can do for those principles from City Hall.
I understand. No, I understand. That's understandable. Let's see here. Keep running. You got another keep running. You're like the Forrest Gump of this show. They're all just telling you to keep running.
I hope you did too. I mean,
because
you know how Forrest Gump always shows up in places?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like I didn't do this by design, but when I look back over my career, I've shown up in a bunch of random places, that were interesting to reflect upon. So yeah, I felt like Forrest Gump before, but that's funny to hear it in that context.
And then Christopher adds snowboard China Peak near Fresno, California.
Right on. I'll check it out. Thank you for the tip.
There you go. And we got that rain, so the fires are a little more under control now.
Yep.
So Kate has a question for you, Shahid. Will Sanders be made budget committee chair? ?
I certainly hope so. If Biden, you were talking about Romney, we can expect his voice to be when whatever channels he has available to him. But we should blame Biden if he invites a voice like that into his cabinet. And if he's going to even consider a voice like Romney in his cabinet, I would damn well hope that he would bring Bernie into his cabinet, given how much Bernie did to put Biden in the White House. And this is a point to make inescapably clear. Bernie campaigned for Biden harder than Biden did.
Yeah.
And, if Bernie was the nominee, there wouldn't have been any doubt whether he would have won. He would have won in a landslide.
We would have known that night. If Bernie was the nominee, we would have known that night. He would have won in a landslide. He would have crushed it. He would have won. I think Biden's going to screw him as hard as he can. I really do. I have no confidence he is going to extend any olive branch to Bernie. He'll do whatever he can to avoid that.
And even if he brings him in, he will marginalize him.
Oh,
because you
time.
can give somebody a seat and still cut them out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's, I mean, they've already, just having John Kasich up there, wagging his finger at the left. I mean, it's unbelievable. In American politics, if you're a lefty, the phrase is, if you win some, you win some, you lose some. If you're a lefty in American politics, the phrase is, you lose, and maybe there's a few bright spots. Like that's it. That's it. I mean, this is at least that's the way it's been my. No, I'm not going to throw in the towel either. But I'm not going to, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything either. Yes. I mean, if you're a lefty, Abby Hoffman said it best, back in the day where they were like, "Do you have disdain for your country?" And he's like, "Nowhere near the disdain my country has for me." And that if you're a lefty in the United States, that's just the truth. That's just the way it is. Both presidential candidates said that anyone who thinks like me should be put in jail. They both said that. Biden did, Trump did. So
I think there's an important point to recognize here, too, in terms of the commonality between both of the candidates. I'm thinking about the fracking piece, right? Like, they are committed to a past paradigm that has already proven its failure.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately the other voice, as you were quoting Abby Hoffman, that was coming to my mind is Frederick Douglass, in the context of power conceding nothing without a demand. Like, we the people demanded that Trump get the hell out of the White House. And we've been successful in that. And we need to maintain the same level of mobilization and alarm and focus that we brought to that struggle to holding Biden accountable to the future. Now, to be between you and I frankly don't have a great deal of hope for a Biden administration. And I don't have a lot of...
Well, I have none. So if you have any, you have more than me. So.
Well, it's the next point to make it clear. And I don't have any trust, but I have some hope in a Harris administration, because Kamala Harris has... I don't normally say that somebody being a weather vane is a positive thing, right? I would like to see politicians have principles and stand by them. And that notwithstanding, as someone who has shifted substantially over the course of her career, when she was the district attorney in San Francisco and the attorney general of California, she was not progressive by a mile. And when she went to Washington, I think she put her ear to the ground, and she has shown up as a senator well to her own previous left. And if she has her ear to the ground, or keeps her ear to the ground, and understands the generational transition that is already sweeping the country, of which she herself is a part, and understands that the conservative constraints on the body politic are being relieved in the face of that generational transition, if she leans into the future, she, not Biden, but I think she might lead the most progressive administration in history. And that ultimately is not up to her. It's not up to Biden. It's up to us. It is up to how much heat we on the left create to hold accountable our power holders. That remains as true under a Democratic administration as a Republican administration. Sure. And I just want, if there's anything I would want your listeners to hold on to from our interview, it's that it is on us, whether or not Sanders comes into a Biden administration and what kind of influence he has, whether or not a Romney comes in and what kind of influence he has. Biden might have won an election, but he's ultimately answerable to us. And there are a lot of different ways to create heat from the grassroots. And I just want to implore everybody to do all of those things and to maintain the level of alarm and focus that we've had recently. Don't take a break, but don't go anywhere. Like ours, we might have won a milestone by plugging one of the holes in the colander, but we have a bunch left. And the need to secure universal healthcare and climate justice are, only two among them. And I really hope everybody remains committed to those goals.
Yeah, in theme, I agree with you 100%. In principle, on a literal level, I don't share your enthusiasm for Kamala Harris at all. But time will tell. But
It's not enthusiasm, it's hope, just to put it out there.
No, I understand. But I do, a lot of it is on us. I mean, just like a micro example, it is a win that, like looking at, I was tweeting about net neutrality over the weekend. It's a huge win. Ajit Pai's going away. No one can dispute that. That's a huge win. Now, who's Biden going to appoint to replace him? Well, it's up to us to make sure it's a pro net neutrality FCC head. It's up to us. Because if left to his own devices, he'll appoint somebody terrible. But if it's one of those situations where the FCC's website is freaking crashing again because so many people are demanding net neutrality, he's going to have to just be like, okay, I'm going to appoint a pro net neutrality head. He promised he would. In that Bernie Biden task force, which I think was lip service and nothing else, but he did promise. He promised a pro net neutrality FCC head. People in the campaign said that Biden himself has evolved on net neutrality. I'll believe it when I see it, but it's up to us to make them keep that promise. Like we got to do it. If we're silent on it, he'll appoint somebody terrible, and nothing will get better. But if we demand it, he's going to have to appoint a pro net neutrality FCC head.
And those demands can take lots of forms. So those can be online petitions. They can be social media campaigns, but they also can, like the fight to win net neutrality in the first place, take creative expression offline in real space. I remember, I think it was 2017, we did actions at Verizon stores across the entire country. I remember one of them, somebody built a giant coffee mug of the sort that Ajit Pai used in order to ridicule him during his visit.
Dumb Reese's cup. He looks like a 5-year-old. He has a Reese's cup as big as, like, it's a Reese's cup mug as big as his head, where he's drinking chocolate milk out of that thing. He's not drinking coffee like a grown-up. I'm surprised he doesn't have a sippy straw. I'm so glad to see that clown go away. Anyway, all right. Everyone wants you to keep running, so I'm going to go along with them. Keep running.
I appreciate that.
Podcast by George wants to know who should be named Secretary of Defense, in parentheses, Secretary of Peace. I vote for Shahid, but Shahid, who's your pick?
I'd love to get Barbara Lee in there. I mean, if there's anybody who's going to defund the Pentagon and rationalize the way we waste that money, I would love to see somebody like that. I mean, if I were to dream of my ideal dream candidate, it might be Edward Snowden, but I don't see that happening.
Wouldn't that be something? I don't see that happening either, but man,
he'd be amazing.
Dare to dream.
The president who appoints Edward Snowden as the Secretary of Defense, that's the point when we will plug a whole bunch of holes in the calendar at once.
You're a dreamer, Shahid. You're a dreamer. I like it in a good way. In a good way. Don't stop running. You have to run again now. I mean, everybody's just telling you to keep. And I agree. I mean, dude, if electoralism is your thing, you should stay in it. I do think you should maybe not completely close the door on local. But that's just me. I could be wrong.
I appreciate that.
I feel like digital rights has a place locally. If somebody is ready to break that ground, it will stay the way you described. I mean, think about, building the internet as a utility, as a human right in a city, which can be done. Think about how that can be a bridge, pun intended, to, really looking into the deep state agencies and really holding them accountable. I mean, there's connections there, and know this. You know this stuff better than I do.
Well, there's plenty of good stuff, even beyond digital rights, that happens at the local level. Here in San Francisco, we've established, we were the first city in the country to adopt a right to civil representation for people facing eviction. So this was like a crucial lever to help keep people in their homes and prevent homelessness. And that started here. And part of my challenge in considering local office is that I actually really like my member of the Board of Supervisors is a socialist, Dean Preston. And so I don't have any interest in replacing him. I guess I could move to somewhere else in San Francisco to replace somebody else on the Board of Supervisors. So
rents are going down, buddy. I mean, that is a possibility. And then you got yourself an alliance. It's just saying don't close the door. I'm not saying you route. I'm just saying I wouldn't close the door completely. I would leave the door like open a pinch.
I'm certainly happy to do that. When you talked about electoralism being my thing, just to make this clear too, I wouldn't even describe it as I've long recognized it as a racket, and my understanding of that only became deeper confronting the challenges in the press, particularly that I confronted over the last year. But I ultimately ran not because electoralism is my thing, but because I heard Bernie say, run for everything. I saw my voice in Congress being such a part of the problem. And I knew that as long a shot as I would present, I have all the tools and I know how to do the job. And so it just became to me a question of, can I sleep at night, not offering an alternative to my city, knowing that I could do the job, knowing that I have the tools to crack Pelosi's coalition if the press shows up for work. And, I couldn't face my nephews and nieces in the future and say I did everything I could if I didn't, in fact, do everything I could. And so, I ran against Pelosi as an extension of that principle. And, again, the question of 2022 is she still there? And who else might step into her place? And is my voice still as valuable there? And is there as much how can I be most helpful is the question before me. And that's the question that's always guided my career in the past. And it'll inform whatever I do next.
Shahid, this is Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, I respect what you do. I'd love to see you in the Congress. I'd love to see you in the Senate. But friendly reminder, I was a mayor at one point in time. I was a mayor. I was Mayor Bernie Sanders. My wife helped make a punk rock venue in Burlington, Vermont, legendary venue. Saw the Misfits there in '81. So there's a message.
Is that
from Bernie
true?
For you. Yeah.
The punk rock venue, and I didn't know about that.
Yes, it's a fun story, man, and it was mostly Jane that was behind it more so than Bernie. The all ages venue in Burlington, Vermont. I don't think it's still around, but like in the '80s when that whole subculture was really taking root. Bernie saw value in it. He thought it was a good thing. It kept, it kept young people out of trouble, quite frankly, and he thought it was good. He also acknowledged that, a lot of these bands are singing about politics. There's a civic end to this. So he made sure that their venue was properly funded. And it was like Burlington's Gilman Street.
That's amazing.
And it was Jane that was like a really big pusher for it too and did a lot for it. So yeah, no, that is true. And he was a mayor. I
can't love the man anymore.
He was a mayor. No, it's a beautiful story, man. All right. So that was podcast by George. It is let me make sure Crehag Pasta Jardula. I'm not sure if it's
Pasta
Craig
Jardula, yeah.
No, I know who it is. It's Craig Pasta Jardula from the Convo Couch. What's up, buddy? Pasta
he's watching right now? Right now.
Yeah, he's watching right now. Nice. What's up, Craig? I call him Pasta, as friends, but I'll try to.
Oh, because you guys are both in Pasadena.
Well, right. Yeah, I was up until recently. I moved recently, but yeah. But I know sometimes he goes by Craig on the show, so I'll use the full Craig Pasta Jardula. So
as you're 20, shout out. Can I tell a quick story about him?
Sure. Well, he's got a shout out for you after, but yeah, sure.
Okay, fair enough. So I show up we were going to do an empty chair debate at Pelosi's house. Mm-hmm. Using a mobile soundstage that he helped connect our campaign to. And I roll up to get on the soundstage, and he is up top, dressed up like a chicken, basically emulating Nancy Pelosi running from the debate.
Yeah, dude. I saw that online. So he says, as your 2022 campaign manager, Shahid, we have to work on a few things. I will shoot you my notes later. Much love.
Okay, tell him I look forward to it.
There's a guy who could be mayor if he wanted to. Pasta could be on city council. Pasta could be mayor if he wanted to be. I've told him this a couple times. I don't think it's his thing, which I understand that, but he could be mayor of Pasadena if he wanted to be.
I don't know enough about Pasadena, but he's certainly a very charming fellow, and I think
he's the guy where it's like you go out with him and everybody knows him and says hello to him and starts like throwing shots his way and stuff like that. Like I was like, dude, you would win. Like you could, and then you could. I mean, anyway. Would you consider local off? No, I'm just fucking with you. I'm not asking.
I detect a theme here.
Omar coming in again. Thank you so much, Omar. I'm from Tulare County. His horrible peace run here. I'll donate. Well, thank you so much for that, Omar. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Christopher Walker. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, George. Thank you, Pasta. Shout out to the Convo Couch. Lots of love to our friends over the Convo Couch. And thank you again, Omar. Shahid, where can people find you?
I used to refer to people in our campaign site is still up at shahidforchange.us. I'm sure we'll make an announcement there if my plans change. I'm also online at shahidbuttar.com. You can find me on any of the social media platforms at Shahid for Change. And so appreciate the chance to rejoin you today. Thanks for bringing me on.
Thanks for coming, man. And congratulations on everything. And I am very stoked to see what you do next. I know it's going to be awesome, whatever you decide. And, I'm with you, buddy. Thanks for fighting the good fight.
Right on, brother.
We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, you guys know the drill. Lucy, she's running around here somewhere. This is my new apartment, by the way. I know you can't tell because it's exactly the same thing, but I did move recently. This is the new place. I think I got to adjust the screen a little bit. It's a work in progress, but Lucy's running around somewhere. There's still a few boxes around, but Lucy, she says meow. I say peace.